Join us in a festival that promises to be extraordinary, because Bali is extraordinary.
You to our authors in just a moment, and you will have some opportunities to ask questions as well. So I'm going to remind you now, because it's such a short session, the time will fly. Have a think about what you might want to ask as we're speaking, and please keep your questions to questions, not comments, because no one wants to be that person, particularly not in this session. I'm just saying.
Unless you just want to exclaim, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Unless you just want... We can all do that collectively, if you like, at the end. We are meeting on the land of Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge that the land was never ceded. Today our discussion is about women and anger. Last year, Fremantle Press published a collection of essays. Who's read it? How brilliant was it? I loved it so much. I burst into tears about 20 times in the first 2 pages, and I'm not sure what that says about how I deal with anger, but there you go. So Liz Bursky and Georgia Richter from Freo Press invited a series of Australian women to contribute. And Liz noted in her introduction that women's anger still attracts widespread and often vicious condemnation, and that her favourite public expression of women's rage is Julia Gillard's famous misogyny speech in Parliament in 2012. Anne Aly reminded her that today is actually the 9th anniversary. So, yes, it feels very appropriate we're having this conversation. I would like you to meet 3 women who contributed in such powerful and personal and courageous ways. Victoria Midwinter Pitt is one of Australia's leading documentary filmmakers. Her work included Surviving Mumbai, Leaky Boat and Afghanistan Inside Australia's War. Anne Aly is the federal member for Cowan and a professor at Edith Cowan University, specialising in terrorism, counter-terrorism and radicalisation. And Meg McKinlay is a children's writer and poet. She's published 18 books for young people and a collection of adult poetry. Please make them welcome. I'm just getting out of the way. Now,
wise move.
Can we start first, because it feels just so special that we are meeting today. It is the 9th anniversary of Julia Gillard's famous misogyny speech. It feels like there should be so many more examples of such incandescent, articulated, beautiful rage from women that are public that we can look to. Can I ask just your thoughts on perhaps that speech and where we've moved from there? Anne?
Do you want to? No, you go first. That speech and where we've moved from there. I wish we could say that we've moved from there, but I don't think we have. And I think, this year we've seen the Women's March, and we've seen, it was, a lot of people described it as a moment. And I remember standing up in Parliament and saying, I hope it's not just a moment. I hope it's not just something that's written into the margins of the history books as something that's happened, and then we go back to business as usual. I'd like to think that beyond a moment, there's momentum around women's anger, women's outrage, and women's rage, because I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just rage, it's outrage. And outrage is often seen more as a kind of a justifiable response to injustice, inequality, and all of those things. So, have we moved on from there? I don't think we have, particularly not in Parliament. But I hold optimism that we will move on from there.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't agree with you. It's a good beginning, huh?
It's
good
so
start.
good. It's so the conversation that Victoria and I have every time.
Yeah, we've got to just go and have a little riot at the end of this, and anyone's very welcome to join us. So I reckon that the little spot where I maybe don't agree with you, and I'm really excited not to agree with you, is about the word we. So when you say we haven't moved on, I think that the patriarchy has not moved on, and that's hardly a surprise. That's hardly a surprise. 9 years is actually a short period of time. But we, women, I think we've come a long way in those 9 years. I think that the impulse to actually speak out has grown. I think that the number of women who feel that they are justified and they're not alone in the feelings that they have, and those little dots beginning to join up, I think we've changed massively. It's just the beginning, but I think it's a seismic shift. I think it's the beginning of an earthquake. Big change. Patriarchy, not so much.
In the spirit of the theme of the panel, I'm going to agree and disagree with both of you. My abiding feelings when I heard that speech were gratitude to Julia Gillard for doing that in the public sphere, as you said, such an articulate but also incandescent way. And I don't think we have to be articulate. I think we're just allowed to be incandescent. But the fact that it was both was wonderful. I felt gratitude and relief, as if I'd been holding my breath for such a long time. And we've all written in the book about our childhood experiences. And I think we have been clenched for a long time. And so there was that sense of finally someone has said this. But I feel like we have moved a bit. And I feel like it's mostly women, but I feel like as a whole, we have shifted a tiny bit because, and I guess a way of thinking about this might be that I think if a similar speech were made in Parliament today, I think it would still be, roundly mocked and derided by men of all stripes, but they wouldn't be as surprised and taken aback by it because that ground has been broken. So I guess we're talking about really small steps. But I do think there's movement, incremental.
I was really interested that Liz said a lot of the women that she approached to write for this collection of essays didn't feel they had anything to say about rage or found it very difficult to write about it, a difficult process. So I'm interested in how the three of you reacted first and then found the process. Let's start with you, Victoria.
Well, I found it a really natural thing to be asked about, and I was really quick to go, absolutely, I know a lot about that. I've thought about that a lot in my life. I'd really like to do that. And that was like maybe the first 90 seconds, and then I just felt physically sick, actually. Oh, shit, what have I said that I would do this? And it was really confronting. It was very surprising to me how bothered I was about speaking about this when I actually began to put pen to paper. And my working career has been asking other people to sit down and on the public record talk about very difficult things and talk about them from a place of real truth. And so having agreed to do this, I just didn't feel like I could fudge it. I couldn't just say come out with some nice principles and a colourful anecdote or two that were about other people, not me. I had to really go there. It was actually very, very difficult. But the great thing for me was reading the book. And I think something really physical shifted in me when I read it, because I just saw those experiences that were so excruciating and so powerful as well, but saw those mirrored across so many of the chapters and realised that, of course, that I'm not alone in that.
Similar, I guess. When I was asked if I had an idea that I'd like to pitch, did I have any rage in a way that I could write about it? I guess I felt two things. I felt, yeah, I do have rage. I feel once I'm asked about it, I do feel that I'm clenched internally a lot of the time. But on the flip side of that, I felt that I didn't know what that was about, and that I didn't have a right to feel it. You know, I'm white, I'm middle class, I'm heterosexual. What has happened to me? What right do I have to claim the level of anger that I felt myself feeling? And then just, you know, on the most basic level, where does that rage come from? And that for me was the really interesting part of that process, was to follow that thoughts down the rabbit hole, you know, and to realize that in a really, what felt like a self-indulgent way, that the time that I felt the most enraged, and this was sort of the topic sentence that you'd like if I started with, was when I would say to my husband or my daughter, would you let me finish my sentence? You know, and it was that. So starting with that, and to be able to just follow that back down, you know, that they say, and the theme of the festival is self-reflection, isn't it? You know, and they say that life is lived forwards but understood backwards. That process for me of investigating why there was so much invested in that sentence, and to start to explore the really deep-seated issues of, you know, powerlessness and voicelessness, and how that was all connected with this deep knot of gendered sort of, you know, marginalisation. That was fascinating for me. Sort of intellectually, it was fascinating. The writing process was, I just found I'm a really slow and considered writer. This was completely different. It was fast. There was a velocity that came with those feelings of anger. I had my jaw clenched a lot of the time, but I wrote quickly.
Gosh, I guess for me, like, I often say yes to something. My office will tell you this all the time. I go, yeah, I'll do it. And then as it gets closer to the time, I go, what did I agree to do? And that's what this was like. But I do remember spending a lot of time thinking about rage. And really, for me, there was a cautiousness around it, I have to say, because as a Muslim woman, I've lived that whole Muslim rage thing that came after 9/11. Muslims were seen as angry, you know, the angry Muslim who just wants to kill everyone. So there was a real caution around expressing rage. And I wanted to kind of express it in a way that separated it from anger, that it wasn't just about a kind of a passionate response to something. It was more than a passionate response. Rage is more than a passionate response. It's a quiet, creepy, cumulative thing that grows on you and kind of overtakes you when you least expect it. And so I kind of molded around in my head for a few weeks before I actually started writing. And I searched in the troves of my memories for a quintessential moment in my childhood, like the other authors did as well, that kind of captured what that meant, what rage meant, and where did it start for me? Where did my rage start was where I asked, was the question that I was asking myself. Because it wasn't something that just happened yesterday, or, you know, when I got elected to Parliament and realised what a man's world it is. But it's something that I've been cautioned against all my life, have been wary about over the past 2 decades as a Muslim woman, but something that I realised when I thought about it started actually very early for me. And that was the process. And like you, Meg, once I started writing, normally I'm a fast writer, but once I started writing this, it just all came out.
Feels like such a common response from, and I can only speak from the women's experience anyway, but it just feels like so many women have just layered and layered and layered, angry moment after angry moment, because we have not been able to give it a voice. Can I quote you, Anne? Rage creeps up on you, from your essay. It's stealthy like that. Rage shadows you. And it's so interesting to me that shadow just stays there like a volcano.
Yeah, and it is. And it's like, for me, I relate the story to the Arabic word and the Arabic concept of sabr, which roughly translates to patience. And for Arab women, sabr or patience is held like a trophy. You know, it's a badge of honor that you wear, that you're patient. Oh, look at you, you're so great, you're patient. And patience is going to get you everything that you ever wanted in life. And in my essay, I say, you know, if you're patient, it'll even get you a dishwasher. Don't ask me how, but patience will get you a dishwasher. So, you know, this idea that patience is a virtue and rage is kind of like something that women don't do. We don't fart, we don't perspire, and we do not rage.
What do we do instead of fart, Anne? Because
But we are taught from such a young age, aren't we? I mean, maybe everyone has to mask their farts, although I think that boys might make a kind of a currency out of them in a way that we don't.
Games, they have competition.
And rage is similar, perhaps. You know, I realised when I started writing, I just recalled so many memories from my childhood that I thought, you know, they didn't even feel like memories. They felt like things that I was excavating, you know, from a past that was lost to me. That rage is stealthy and it creeps up on you, but some of us don't even ever get to the point, I think, where we allow it to creep up on us, to even come into the light, because we are just taught to mask it to the extent that we often, I think, aren't even aware of what we're feeling. You know, I have a vivid memory from the age of about 14 of sitting at a bus stop, and I think I was just in deep sort of thought about something, waiting for a bus, and a man walked past and said, "Cheer up, love, it can't be that bad." And a lot of us have heard a variation on that. And I just had to restrain myself from punching him, you know, from leaping up from the bus stop and I, you know, I set it aside. But then when I was thinking about all of this, I remembered that and I thought, that was rage there from thousands of little incidents like that, where I'd had to bite my tongue. And that was one moment where just a little glimmer of it appeared. But, you know, I pushed it away.
because you literally lost your voice.
Yeah, I mean, what do you say? What can you say? And if you say anything, you can't take a joke. And he didn't mean anything by it. And, you know, yeah.
As a child, and I'd love you to relate the story of Agapanthus and what happened to you, if you don't mind, leading to that moment where it literally affected your voice.
Yes, it's complex. Please stop me if I'm getting too complex. But so I have a memory from about the age of 4. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the children's books, Naughty Agapanthus and Agapanthus, but I have this vivid memory of reading one of these children's books and seeing this little figure of Agapanthus, the girl protagonist, and she was furious about something. And it was just this illustration of her on the page, and her features were contorted in rage, and she was stamping her foot, and the text said, "An Agapanthus stamped her foot." And I recognised myself in that image. You know, it was that quintessential experience of seeing yourself on the page. But you want me to get to the voicelessness aspect of things?
Only if you feel like it.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, it's in the book, you know, and here I am speaking reasonably fluently, but, you know, it's a fairly complicated knot to unravel. I think I did it in several thousand words there, but I was a child who, just wanted to be heard, you know, and didn't want to be made fun of and condescended to, and in that in that scene in the book, it's an Agapanthus stamped her foot and her mother took no notice. And, you know, it's that and that movement to the being ignored. And just could not wait to get to school. You know, I couldn't wait to get to school. Kindergarten was Play-Doh and pop sticks and all the rest of it. And then school was going to be the thing. And then on the very first day of school, I created a small insurrection because, you know, I was an early reader and the teacher was writing everything on the board in capital letters. And I knew that, you know, they weren't for every part of the sentence. They were only for the starts of words and for proper nouns. And so I thought this was some kind of a test. And so I, you know, said, excuse me. And she told me to shush. And then I said, excuse me. And she told me to shush. And then I just started to gather all the children around me. And I ended up on a chair, you know, and my parents received a phone call. And that is just, you know, one in a series of shutting downs, I suppose, where I thought school is where I'm going to blossom. I'm going to be listened to. This teacher is going to be my lighthouse. The world will be opening up now. I've got my own desk and I can, and instead I was treated as if, you know, I was too smart by half and needed to be quiet. And the end result of what was a much more complex process was that I developed a stutter. And that stutter, you can see the irony there, right? I'm trying to speak, I'm trying to be heard, and then that being shut down leads me to become actually physically voiceless. And that act of being caught in, you know, the contortions that stuttering brings with it affects my identity and causes me further to shut down. And yeah, it was a very complex and difficult thing. Yeah.
We want to talk about your childhood relationship with anger, because you and your father.
No.
I love it.
Yes. You and your father. Okay, we won't. You and your father both have a temper. So a line I found really interesting in this statement you made, that you have a temper, your father have a temper. In your essay, you say there was some semi-conscious part of me that assumed it was your father's capacity for anger that put him at the head of the table. It's such an interesting observation. I just wondered if you would expand on that.
Yeah, it's one of those things kids navigate without having a map, don't they? They instinctively know what is going on without, you know, having the theory or the whole context around it, but they know. And I think that sense for me was very strong, that Dad was the head of the household, and a really big part of it was that he would go to 11 or 12 on his anger in a way that nobody else in the house would. And I think part of that was that, well, there are two really interesting things to me about that. One was that was the connection I made, but it was definitely in my mind related to everything else I saw in the world. Everything else I saw in the world, in every other part of the world that I moved in, women gave way to men. And there was an edge of anger about that. There was a transaction about anger that could happen, or anger that was forestalled if that went on. So my reading my family like that was part of that wider radar. But the other thing that I love is that it made me angry as a child. I recognized it, I could see it, and I really didn't accept it. I only realized this a few years ago, and it was really wonderful to realize this, that as a tiny person, it's my earliest memories, it felt to me, honestly, like Mum should be in charge. And actually, it felt like Mum was really in charge, and Mum should be in charge. That felt, I don't know, that felt right. That felt even and right to me. Yeah. But it's still the case, like having said all of that, now I'll flip this around because it's complex, which is what makes it so interesting, is that I can say all of those things about my father, but I'm carrying his temper. I don't have my mother's temper. I have my father's temper, which is wild. Yeah. Yeah.
In what way?
I write about it in the chapter, but when I too, like, I've got like seminal moments in my childhood that I can now look back on, but I come from a family of English migrants, and we were absolutely brought up to contain our anger. So, what was the word? Sabr.
Patience.
So this is an Egyptian patience, and we had Englishness, but I'm sure it was the same thing. It was basically shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, my anger was not like an issue as far as I knew until, I left school. And then when I was about 18 or 19, honestly, out of nowhere, I developed this really black temper, like really black temper in many other aspects of my life. I was a, fun, interesting, kind, nice person. And then for the people who were close to me, the people who lived with me, I would really, really, really lose my shit. And just short of violence. So I never hit anyone, I never threw anything at anyone, never physically, directly hurt anyone, but I would throw things, I would break things, and I did a lot of screaming, and I said a lot of very, very, very cruel things. Yeah. Yeah. So this was shocking to me, and also was really shocking, and it was deeply, deeply mortifying. And I began to get very worried about the effect that I was having on people that I really loved. So at the age of about 23, 24, I went and found a shrink to talk to, and I was expecting that what she would do, it would be like one of those, you know, when you've been caught drink driving, and they send you to a workshop, and so I'm told. I've never, and what they do apparently is that they put you through all of this stuff where they make you realize the consequences of your actions. You know, the people who get injured and all the bad things that happen. That's what I thought my shrink would do, that she would shame me into stopping, you know, think about how awful this is, how scary it is, how humiliating and hurtful. I was ready for all of that, like really bracing myself. I told her my whole story and like, come on, bring it, punish me. And all she did was say one thing. She hadn't said anything the whole way through. And when I got to the end of my terrible story, all she said was this. She said, "Why are you angry? Why are you angry?" Yeah. It was devastating. Yeah, it's devastating. Yeah. And because the truth was, you know, there was a lot behind that door. Yeah. And that was about, well, that's a long story. I'm going to pass the talking stick on in a second, but it was fantastic. And that was probably, you know, the beginning of me actually having a proper life and a proper relationship with myself. Yeah.
That's so interesting, because just hearing you ask that question, or you were asked that question, but hearing you articulate it now, why are you so angry? I had an emotional response to that, you know, and I think it just, even just being asked that question, why are you angry? And being given permission to even think about it, relief again.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that women, that's why I think things have changed, because I think it's like that moment in the Truman Show where bits of the tiled sky fall down, and that's what's happened. And I think that all of us are living out the most ridiculous burdens and constrictions and dangers just because we're women. And you know what? It isn't right. And we all know it. We carry this rage about it because it is not okay. And I think that's what's coming. I can feel the ground breaking.
Sorry, go on.
I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and given the time you've spent in Parliament particularly, but if you have other thoughts.
No, I was just listening to you speak, Victoria, and I looked over at my husband, Dave, because when I met Dave, I was really angry. I'd come out of two. My first relationship was physically violent. My second marriage was also physically and emotionally violent. And I had resigned myself to, if you are not going to be this patient, quiet person and you are going to speak up and be angry, then the price you pay for that is being hit. I honestly remember talking myself through and going, well, Anne, you're just the kind of woman that men like to hit. And that's going to be the price that you have to pay in your life for speaking up. So you make a choice. Either you speak up and you get hit and you take it and you take it and you take it and you bear the bruises, or you stay quiet. And I've made a conscious decision that I couldn't do that I couldn't be that quiet person. And when I first met Dave, I remember one of our first arguments that we had, and I was yelling and screaming and my hands were going up and down. I was banging doors, and Dave just looks at me and he goes, "Really? Do you think I deserve that?" I was like, "Yes, you deserve that." Actually, no, you don't. And it was that, for me, was that moment where I went, why am I so angry? And it was because I'd lived my life thinking that being angry was something that I had to do. I had to be that person. I had to be angry. And it was kind of my shield, if you like. But also, I had flipped around that whole thing of, wearing patience like a badge of honor. And for me, wearing my bruises from being hit and kicked and punched was a badge of honor. It was, here's the price I paid for speaking up. Right? Here's the price I paid for not being quiet and not being patient. Here's the price I paid for being angry. So that really resonated with me, and I know it resonates with Dave too, because we looked at each other when you were telling that story. And talking about Parliament, Parliament is such a white patriarchal institution, and I'm not ashamed to say here that there are many times where I've thought, I don't belong here, I'm leaving. And it's other women who have told me, no, you need to stay because you are fighting this institution. And I hear you both say that the dial has changed, but every time a woman speaks out, every time a woman raises her voice, every time a woman, talks about, I know when I talk about domestic violence, or when even if I talk about, right-wing violent extremism, Grace Tame, Brittany Higgins, the shit that they have copped for speaking out, it's still there. There is still this kind of, don't talk about it, keep it quiet. This whole, there is still in our society, whether it's in Parliament, in the public sphere, there is still this expectation that we just shut up and take it. That's why I say we haven't moved.
I'm going to throw it open to questions. This is such a short session, and I wish that we had more time, but I really encourage you who haven't got this book to pick up a copy and read these essays, and then have a think about your own response. Are there any questions? If you have one, raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone out to you. We have one at the back. Yes, hello.
Kerry.
Hi, Kerry.
And my brain was thinking Grace Tame, Brittany Higgins, and the silencing of them still. I'd just like to know all your thoughts on young women who are thinking of getting into politics are still seeing this. How is like a PR campaign? Can you inspire young women to be angry, but you can still be in politics and in Parliament?
I talk to a lot of young women about this very topic, about, can you be angry and be in politics and be in Parliament? And I think that what we need is a critical mass. I think we need to say, like I said earlier, we had this moment, but let's not make it a moment. Let's make it a momentum. Let's make it a seismic shift. Let's keep it going. Let's really push for that change. And I think that, it's an incredible platform to be a member of Parliament, and an incredible privilege. And I've thought a lot about, how do I use this platform and this privilege? And I'm not afraid to be publicly angry. I'm not afraid to publicly call out hypocrisy or the rubbish when I see it. But I see a lot of people who are. I mean, even Julia Gillard admits that, through her time, she wishes that she had called out the misogyny a lot more than just that speech, that she had spoken out a bit more about it. Julie Bishop has said the same thing. So I think we need a critical mass, and we need to be able to encourage each other to be angry as well. Often the political system and the party system as well, the party and the politics, forces you to toe a line and be quiet and be silent about it. Look at Brittany Higgins withdrew her rape complaint because she was worried about the impact that it would have on the party for the election. I mean, we've got to break this bullshit down. We've got to destroy it. And I can't do that on my own. And even though we have 50% of women in Parliament, or close to 50 now, we can't do that on our own. We need more women to be coming in and helping us to create that critical mass.
Meg, have you got any thoughts?
I don't feel I can speak to that specific question about the context of Parliament, but I will say that while I was sitting and listening to Anne speak just now and also earlier, I was having that reaction again of, these are real things to get angry about. And, that my peace and my rage feels sort of like nothing in context. But the truth is that that's ridiculous. And it's a kind of a self-minimizing, once more. But it's also true to say that the contexts that we're working in are different, but the processes that we're talking about are all coming from exactly the same place, So I am someone who will speak up and will say, be quiet, I'm talking, let me finish my sentence, and all of those things. And I don't throw things anymore, and I don't slam doors. But I have done, and it's just that my context has been different, and I haven't met someone who wanted to hit me for that. And that's just my good fortune, But I spent years in academia sitting at a table where you would say something and somehow it would be almost like you were in a parallel universe in that no one would hear it. And then a moment later, a man would say the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone would respond.
Haven't we all
and
been
I
there?
think, what is happening? These things are all part of the same web.
Yeah.
So I think, as Anne says, the only way to break down the multifaceted kind of, legs of this enormous spider is to just chip away at it in every context that we have, and to achieve that critical mass of, bodies on the ground and voices in the air and, fists clenched.
There seems to be a relationship with truth. You mentioned truth early on in your piece and anger for women.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's where anger is actually really useful for women, and partly why it's been trained out of us, because it is really dangerous, because it's a truth pulse. It's the most direct, visceral, whole body, brain and soul experience that you're in opposition to something. And you might not know that, Sometimes things just seem so ubiquitous, and that's the way things are. Older blokes say stuff to you at bus stops, and that's just how it is. And if you're 14 years old, you just have to put up with it. And the fact that you're angry, for me, is really magnificent. It's a little door opening. It's telling you, actually, that's not just the way things are. You stand in opposition to that. You wouldn't be angry about it. Like I've got a cold and I've lost my voice. I'm not angry about that. I was a bit sad about it. It didn't make me angry, but that makes you angry. You're opposed to it. And it's that truth, the truth of that is really important, because it is very difficult to actually sometimes be honest with ourselves about how much is not okay in the lives that we have. I'm 53 years old, and I really wanted to believe that I was going to have a life without any barriers, that all of the feminist project was done and great. And it's a part of me that doesn't actually want to acknowledge. I don't want to think about all the things that I have to think about, are the things that I can't do in my life. I don't want to think about that. But those things actually do need to be addressed. And the anger is, for me, I'm not too worried about women being angry or angry women coming into Parliament. It's just like, let it rip, as far as I'm concerned. All of those are little signals going off, and we need to pay attention to them, because they're real.
You look historically, both in literature and in like the cultural aspect of how women's anger is framed as opposed to men's anger. Men's anger is seen as a strength, whereas women's anger is really scary. It's hell hath no fury, right? This is really this moment that we're talking about now, where we are now. It's really a factor of generations and generations and generations and generations of a social norm of women's anger as being dangerous and men's anger as being strength. And I think that's a really interesting thing to explore.
There's something as well about, if we, like in current context, if you think about angry men, then it's about violence, and it's like, well, that's scary. And the idea is that they will damage other people. They were dangerous to other people. Whereas women's anger is about that's dangerous to you. If you get angry, you're putting yourself in a dangerous position. That's really interesting, I think.
And we have another, I hope that answered your question. And I know we have a question over here. Oh, sorry. Well, in that case, do we have a question? Yes, we have a question over here. Thank you.
Hello. Is it working? Yeah. Hi. It's a question for Anne, but I'd like to hear the other answers as well from the other two. And you're sitting in Parliament and somebody says something that makes you so angry. I get it just from political talk among my friends. What happens? What's the physical process that you do not to get up and scream? How do you stop yourself from crying or screaming or yelling at these people? How do you articulate yourself when your voice is blocked with rage?
Haven't you seen the photos of me screaming and yelling?
But you don't do it all the time, surely.
I don't hold back. I do scream and yell a lot. A lot. And I don't see any reason why I should hold back. If something is so infuriating, then I think it's perfectly okay to be able to express that physically. And I'm not saying getting up and, punching Peter Dutton in the mouth. Oh, did I say Peter Dutton?
That's the tweet. That's the tweet.
No, not at all, not at all. I certainly do not advocate violence. But to be able to express that anger, in a physical way through yelling about it. Then you kind of try and find ways of using your position in Parliament, the parliamentary system to address the substantial issue. Because if I'm getting angry, it's not over something stupid. It's over a substantial issue. It's over the way that, people on welfare are being treated, or single mothers are being talked about, or domestic violence is being looked at. Those kinds of things. So you find ways within the parliamentary system and avenues in order to make that substantive change. And I think that's the thing, is to look beyond the kind of immediate emotional response, even though there's nothing wrong with an immediate emotional response, but to look at the substantive issue and see how you can affect change for that substantive issue once you get over all the anger.
And for better or worse, I think sometimes we really do have to take that line as women as well, because the moment we bring emotion into it, that we start to scream, rant, and all the rest of it, it's, oh, she's so emotional, she's hysterical, it's all the rest of it.
Tim
so
Wilson
if you can
calls
just
me hysterical
take a step back and be articulate and on the money and factual, and, just take it down one brick at a time in a calm way. And that obviously that works for me as well, because then I'm not speaking under pressure, so I'm less likely to block and,
but the men don't do that. The men get all red-faced and
that's why I say
and rambling.
For better or worse, because they're allowed to and we're not. So maybe we're in a transitional phase where we have to kind of use, different tools in order to take apart the master's house.
I think there are different emotions in there. And sometimes, because they're all very powerful and they're attached to each other, it's hard to see that there is a difference, but there is a difference. And Claire Coleman, I was just quickly looking it up again, her fantastic chapter, she says this brilliant thing. She says, anger without fear or hatred attached to it is a really fertile place to work. And I think sometimes we get muddled between the feelings of fear and hatred that come up for us and think that's anger. And I don't think it is. I think that anger, you can still be angry and behave with your full intelligence engaged. Yeah.
Don't know if we have time for one more question.
Yeah, do we have one?
We've got time for one more question, very quickly. It had to be a very quick question. And then I promise we'll wrap up really quickly. But, we're women and we're angry.
Thanks. I'm really enjoying this session. I was just interested in what the panel thinks about rage and anger in the social media space.
We'll have to keep the answers.
I'll go quickly on that and then I'll pass it on. I actually don't think that's anger. I think it's hatred most of the time. I think that it might come from all sorts of, structural sources. But I think that what you see when people go really crazy is actually hatred. Yeah, which is a different beast.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point there, Victoria, that, as somebody who gets a lot of it, I know that it doesn't come from a place of passion. It comes from a dark place. Whereas anger doesn't necessarily always come from a dark place. It comes from a caring place a lot of the time.
Meg?
I'm happy with that.
Please thank Victoria Midwinter Pitt,
Anne Aly and Meg McKinlay. And again, I encourage you to pick up the book, have a read, and also just have a think about the responses that it provokes in you, some of these essays, when you read them. I just found it fascinating and brilliant and such an important conversation. Thank you all for coming along and listening.
And to thank Anne, Meg and Victoria for joining us this afternoon.
That's beautiful.
We have hand-woven scarves woven for us by women of wood. Thank you.